ITGIRL. You know I am that girl. Oh, Drag Race España, you will never know peace from me. Hi, my name is Matthew, and you might know me as BeLikeBoy on TikTok, it's BeLikeBoy on Twitter, BeLike_Matt_ on Instagram, or you might not know me at all. And for those of you who don't, I am a content creator that talks all things World of Wonder and Drag Race, especially that of Drag Race outside of the US. And today, for my 13th video ever, we are talking about a franchise of Drag Race that is the only one thus far to get 2 videos made by me about it. That's right, we are bringing the perpetual thorn in my side back into the conversation. Drag Race España. More specifically, Drag Race España All-Stars. I know what you're thinking. I cannot keep España's name out of my mouth. But they keep doing things that really warrant talking about. And those things range from questionable at best to disastrous and absurd at worst. And for what we're talking about today, we kind of have a mixture of both. Because you see, on España All-Stars, there was one pivotal decision that, at the time of the episode, left fans scratching their heads. But when looking at the scope of the season as a whole, and perhaps the franchise as a whole, it became blatant how that one decision changed the entire tone of the show forever. Yes, everyone, we are tackling the infamous ball of Drag Race España All-Stars. Let us begin, shall we? The reflection in my glasses isn't fun, but lighting. As always, I would like to start with my little disclaimer about any season of Drag Race that I might negatively review. The criticisms I have are specifically directed towards the show as it is judged and or produced. Nothing I say has to do with the contestants, their talents, or their drag, but rather how the show chooses to produce or present those talents for the sake of storylines. Though I will be bringing up specific drag artists and contestants, I am simply using them as examples to highlight my points in relation to the production of the show as needed. Get it? Got it? Good. As usual, first, let's start with the groundwork. In September 2022, AtresPlayer, the local production network of Drag Race España, announced that the show would be getting its own dedicated All-Stars. This was an announcement for the ages because this was the first and so far only franchise outside of Drag Race US that got its own dedicated All-Stars. Yes, prior to this, we did have seasons like UK vs. the World and Canada vs. the World, which are kind of All-Stars adjacent, but this would be the first time that an international franchise's spin-off would be populated solely by its own alumni. Obviously, people were excited. How could they not be? All-Stars is a time that always calls for celebration. And perhaps more importantly, this was news that kind of confirmed Drag Race España's formidability as an international franchise of Drag Race. At the time, at least. Because seldom has a country's Drag Race found the footing to support its own spin-off. Not without the novelty of having a global feel at least, like UK and Canada did for Versus the World. But España did have that footing. And again, I emphasize, at the time, they had that footing. Keep in mind that when España All-Stars was announced, España 3 hadn't been released yet. The season that arguably tarnished the franchise's reputation. I won't get into it much, so feel free to go watch my España 3 video for more of my thoughts on that train wreck, but basically it can be surmised as a frustrating stretch of 11 episodes that saw so many queens be the cannon fodder of production's favoritism and tunnel vision. España 3 was a train wreck, and in quite a unique way compared to other quote-unquote bad seasons of Drag Race. Season 7 of Drag Race US and Season 3 of Drag Race UK are ones that come to mind. Those 2 seasons were objectively bad in their upsetting judging and ridiculous standards, etc. But I would never say they ruined their respective franchises' reputation. They were more so just dark spots on their respective records. But España 3 did in fact tarnish España's reputation and credibility. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And a notable byproduct of that was the effect it had on fans' excitement for All-Stars. Any excitement that there was for Drag Race España All-Stars suddenly turned into morbid apprehension, let's say. If España All-Stars went into production almost immediately after the filming of España 3, how can we trust that there were any improvements that were made in between? This was the most prominent mentality throughout the España fanbase, and it really dampened any anticipation there was for the first All-Stars of an international franchise. Nonetheless, the season chugged along full steam ahead, with the cast finally being revealed on the 16th of January 2024, populated by 9 icons from the first 3 seasons of Drag Race España. The cast reveal was kind of charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent coded, which did admittedly kind of subside any distaste that fans had for the franchise. The promos were everything, and the McDonald's theme really lended itself to a lot of creative looks. Also, yes, I know that the theme was Spanish flags, do not come for me, divas. The season also saw the return of franchise fan favorites such as Sagittaria, Jiriji Darkly, and most relevant to this video, Drag Sethlas, one of the franchise's 3 Canarian queens and likely the fan favorite from season 2 besides Jiriji. More on Sethlas later. So as always with a cast reveal, pre-season, spirits were high. People started feeling confident again. You know, maybe this time Drag Race España will reclaim its time in the sun. Maybe España 3 was a fluke, a trip. And this will be the franchise's return to form. And for the first 2 episodes of the season, it kinda was. Early on, there wasn't much riggery that one could sniff out like you could by the second episode of España 3. The first episode, the talent show, was an exhilarating premiere, which is honestly the expectation that España set for itself with every talent show. And then the Snatch Game in episode 2 was one of the funniest Snatch Games ever, in my opinion. I was giggling the whole time, I fear. For the most part, both episodes were judged fairly. You know, there might have been 1 or 2 queens that were robbed of a high placement, such as Paquita in the Snatch Game, but overall, the top 2 and bottom 2 in the first 2 episodes were correct. So slowly, we the audience started to feel a little more comfortable. It seemed that if for a moment, the horrid days of España's dark age were behind it. And yes, I say this even with the caveat that Drag Sethlas did win the first 2 challenges back to back, which easily, in retrospect, can be misconstrued as favoritism. However, keep in mind that right now, we are only looking at the first 2 episodes of España All-Stars in a vacuum, without any context from the rest of the season. Sure, these episodes do support an argument that you can tell Drag Sethlas is going to win the season from the jump, but I've said in videos before that that isn't necessarily a bad thing. As long as the obvious winner's path to the crown feels natural and justified. And in my opinion, Sethlas rightfully earned those first 2 challenge wins. Her talent show was easily the standout from the premiere, and her Snatch Game kept up with the likes of comedic genius Poopy Poison. And I don't even think that that was just my opinion. I think most of the fanbase agreed that Sethlas rightfully earned those first 2 wins. And they were more willing to accept it because, as I mentioned earlier, Sethlas was one of the premier fan favorites after season 2 aired. Seeing her claim these wins was exciting and almost validating to the fandom. And then, episode 3 happened. And it changed everything. Episode 3 saw Drag Race España return to the ball challenge, the theme this time around being the Deadly Sins Ball, similar to the 7 Deadly Sins Ball from Canada's Drag Race Season 2. The categories were Heaven, Hell, and the Deadly Sins, the third of which was where queens were tasked with creating an outfit that was inspired by one of the great vices, that being gluttony, sloth, pride, envy, greed, lust, and wrath. Overall, it was a great ball. There are 2 things you can always expect from Drag Race España, and those are great talent shows and spectacular runways. And the runways for this ball sure were spectacular. There were only a few less than desirable looks, and those looks of course came from the runways the queens had to make. But what's interesting here is that one of the less than desirable looks won the challenge. Drag Sethlas, after serving a look based on the sin of pride, won the challenge alongside Jiriji Darkly, making this Sethlas' 3rd challenge win in a row. Immediately, this win raised eyebrows across the fandom. The ball is an interesting challenge because though there is no one way to judge it, the consensus is that a contestant's 3rd look, the look they make, is unequivocally the most vital to how you do in the challenge. It's the look that can land you in the top or pull you into the bottom. If we break it down into hypothetical numbers, the consensus is that a queen's first 2 looks, the looks they bring, are worth 25% each of the score overall, while the 3rd is worth 50%. Again, these are not official scoring cards provided by the show, but just the general understanding that most viewers have of how the ball is judged. Now let's be clear, Sethlas brought two very solid looks for the first two categories of this challenge. Her Hell look might even be one of the best runways from the season. However, her third look was admittedly one of the lower quality ones of all the looks made in the workroom that week. Any fan could see. So with all this in mind, when Sethlas was announced as one of the queens that was going to be critiqued that week, my mind thought it was going to shake out in one of two ways. One, Sethlas would be high with the judges telling her, "You are in the top because your first two looks are so good, but because this third look isn't successful, you will not be awarded a win." Or two, she would be low with the judges telling her, "You are near the bottom because your third look isn't successful, but because your first two looks are so good, we are not putting you up for elimination." Either of which are par the course when this sort of situation happens during a ball. But that's not how things shook out. In fact, most of the focus during her critiques was on her second look, which of course deserved high praises, but there was very little focus on her other two looks. The runway she made only got one sentence from Little Javier, and her first look wasn't even mentioned by the judges at all during the critiques. At least in the edit we saw, it wasn't. And so, when she received that win, all of a sudden, it recontextualized the entire season. All of a sudden, fans started to look at the edit differently. All of a sudden, España's Dark Ages seemed to be back in full force. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is that one singular challenge win that fans disagree with is grounds for accusing production of season-long favoritism. After the ball, any gratification that the fans felt towards Sethlas' first two wins turned to resentment, even if those first two wins were deserved, because now it seems that the season was made for Sethlas to win. And Sethlas going through the remainder of the season without ever placing below high only added fuel to that specific fire. With a track record of win, 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 high win, she claims the best track record of all time, beating out the likes of Ben de la Creme and Keona. And this vindicated a lot of viewers to turn against Drag Race España because, well, how preposterous it was that a queen who was favored quote-unquote all season long should have the best track record ever. But is it too late to say that, well, I don't think Sethlas was favored all season long? Okay, let me rephrase. It's clear that Sethlas was production's favorite to win, let's not get it twisted. But in my opinion, she only had one unjustified placement. As we discussed before, her talent show and Snatch Game were undeniably fair wins. Her team performed notably better in the girl groups, earning her a well-deserved high placement. And then the final roast, right before the finale, in tandem with her runway, was a justified final top placement. The sticking point here is that pesky little win in episode 3, which sticks out like a sore thumb. And that's why I'm of the stance that one single challenge win can alter the entire sentiment towards a season. To clarify, specifically the sentiments toward the production of a season, not the queens themselves. Let's make that clear. I hope nobody here is using this as an excuse to invalidate Drag Sethlas' talent as an artist, because A, she truly did dominate a lot of the challenges, and B, how she is judged is out of her control. But I digress. Anyways, as I was saying, this disrupts the sentiment towards the production of a season because one futile decision, one inequitable call can tarnish a show's credibility as a fair competition and calls into question the entire decision-making process, not just the decision-making process of one single episode. So in this context, no matter how perfect, no matter how fair, no matter how justified every single one of Sethlas' other placements are going to be, because of this one disagreeable call made by the judges, there is always going to be a dark mark of favoritism on Sethlas' legacy as a Drag Race winner. And I'm not saying this to discredit Sethlas' reign, because I do think that Drag Sethlas is a sickening performer, a beautifully artistic drag persona, and kind of the rightful winner of España All-Stars. But I am saying this as a cautionary tale to Drag Race itself, that the fandom can be a vindictive place, and they will remember the poor calls before they remember any of the good calls. And that's the unfortunate part, because I often wonder how her coronation would have been received otherwise. There are a lot of things about Sethlas that could and would put her in the pantheon of Drag Race winners. A fan favorite from her original season who got sent home before the finale, huge fan support going into Drag Race España All-Stars, and an interesting political legacy outside of the show, which I haven't even gotten the chance to get into in this video. You should go research that on your own. It's very fascinating. Would she have been hailed as one of the most successful Drag Race winners by the fandom if she didn't win the ball? Probably. But that single win squandered any chances of that legacy. And it squandered the legacy of the entire season as a whole because it was the catalyst for the single most egregious storyline of the entire show. Oh, what? You guys didn't think I would make this video without mentioning Sagittaria, now did you? Sagittaria is a runner-up from Drag Race España Season 1, returning as a contestant on España All-Stars, where she finished the season with 6th place. When you watch Drag Race España All-Stars, there is one storyline that production really wants to hit home for you about Sagittaria. Sagittaria is stupid. And they bring it up a lot. And this is where I would normally show you a compilation of all the other girls calling Sagittaria stupid, but allegedly AtresPlayer is notorious for taking down content that uses their footage, even if properly credited and falls under fair use, so I am not running that risk right now. But just know, even in the first 30 minutes of the first episode, it's mentioned at least 8 times. I checked. To be fair, sometimes when you watch Drag Race, overarching running gags are common, especially in environments consisting only of shady drag queens. To them, in that workroom, it's just a funny joke that is a good and shorthand way to kiki with your sisters. But in terms of editing a TV show, in terms of editing a season of Drag Race, a running gag is never left in this often. Not to this degree, at least. Not to the point where it's brought up so many times in just the first 30 minutes of the entire season. When I was watching the first 2 episodes, I was truly scratching my head trying to figure out why the producers kept including it in these episodes. Because it really got to a point where the other girls were saying it so often in the episodes that I was sitting here thinking like, okay, I get it, Sagittaria is blonde, airheaded, and dumb. But then it all made sense in the infamous episode in question, episode 3. You see, when who? You see, when Drag Sethlas won the ball, Twitter wasn't the only thing that disagreed. In fact, Sagittaria had a few choice words to say in the workroom during Untucked. Everything is wrong. I think the way they judged this episode was absolutely disastrous. Sethlas, for me, you weren't the winner of the challenge. And later, in a conversation with Ornella Gongora, Ornella told her it's just a game, to which Sagittaria responded, "A game, I think, is based on equality. But I don't think that we are all equal. I feel like some are judged very well, and the others, if you have a slip or do something they don't agree with..." That was it. A corset with glued crystals. I dropped everything. And suddenly, and stick with me here because I do recognize that this does get a little tinfoil hatty, all the gears started turning. Suddenly, the constant barrage of Sagittaria's stupid and Sagittaria's aloof comments started to make sense. When I was discussing this moment on TikTok, I said that it is seldom that Drag Race would let a queen call out production to its face, especially during the filming of a season. I mean, that makes sense, right? It's never a good look when queens who compete in your competition call you out for your favoritism. But when it does happen, the show has to find ways to do quote-unquote damage control, we'll call it. Whether that includes finding ways to punish a queen, such as making them lip sync for disqualification, or finding ways to discredit a queen. See where I'm going with this? My conspiracy theory is that so much of the queen's shadiness towards Sagittaria's intelligence was left in the edit intentionally to lead up to this moment. I think that production wanted the audience to have this predisposition that Sagittaria was ditzy, airheaded, dense prior to episode 3. They wanted to drill it into our minds so that when we, the audience, finally got to this episode and finally reached this moment, we would just roll our eyes and say to ourselves, oh, that's silly Sagittaria. She has not a clue what she's talking about. It's such a conspiracy theory. I see the motivation here, of course. At the time of filming, Sagittaria's comments would have delegitimized... Did you hear that? Okay. At the time of filming, Sagittaria's comments would have delegitimized Drag Sethlas as a crowned queen, who kinda was production's favorite to win. If you put your producer hat on, you would think to yourself, oh, we couldn't have that. No, 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 no. Of course not. We have to find ways to delegitimize Sagittaria instead. Luckily for us, there just happens to be all this readily available footage of the queen's bantering and shading Saggy for her unintelligence. We'll just leave all of this footage in the edit and then voila! And then all of the fans will just roll their eyes and dismiss Sagittaria when she tries to pull this stunt in Untucked because... Sagittaria, she's just so dumb. And also, it just so happened to be a convenient and shorthand way to give Drag Sethlas a storyline that is often associated with Drag Race winners, which easily poised her as the confident and unbothered hero in this season at odds against the incompetent, frustrated, and envious Sagittaria. I think production clearly saw a two birds, one stone opportunity with this moment. To discredit any opposition against Drag Sethlas, therefore hopefully reinforcing her as a Drag Race winner, and in addition giving her a readily available storyline that would back up her crowning even further. Little did they predict, however, that most of the fandom would be on Sagittaria's side. Whatever irritation that came from the judging of the challenge, the treatment and edit of Sagittaria increased it tenfold. Now, since then, Drag Sethlas and Sagittaria have had a reconciliation. But my point here is that the damage control done by Drag Race España All-Stars was horrendous. By itself, Sethlas winning the ball tarnished the legacy of her reign, but how the show treated Sagittaria afterwards tarnished the legacy of the season as a whole. The dagger twisted even deeper as little as one episode later when Sagittaria announced to the judges that she wanted to quit, and then the judges told her that that's not her decision to make. No. Again, I want to emphasize here that what transpired on the set of Drag Race España All-Stars was not within the Queen's control. But this, unfortunately, is a failure of production to treat their queens fairly and perhaps more importantly, to treat them responsibly. I think that any season/production of Drag Race has a dutiful responsibility to any artists and contestants that walk through that entrance. And España is not upholding that responsibility, I would argue. Drag Race España's continuous carelessness and lack of foresight is hurting not only its queens, but its own franchise. All Stars is España's second strike, and I honestly don't know if the franchise can survive a third. But yeah. All of that to say, I don't think España All-Stars was that bad of a season. I really don't. The season was a fun time that never failed to deliver on the entertainment. I think those first two episodes are some of the best of the year so far, which truly propelled an all-stars feel early on in the season. The runways in particular were a high point. Drag Sethlas' Day of the Beast might actually be the best runway of the season. Jariji's Heaven and Divina de la Muerte's looks are also up there. Oh, and Samantha Ballantyne's, hold on, what's the word again? Martirlizadas? I don't remember how it's pronounced. Her final runway before the finale. Overall, España All-Stars served high-class drag. Plus, it's certainly not the worst España season there is. It's just that silly, little, annoying, pestering episode 3 that sticks out so abhorrently, which ruins the taste of the season in so many people's mouths. And it's all because of one singular, solitary challenge win that changed everything. But still, I would like to thank the cast of Drag Race España All-Stars for serving a fun and kind of iconic season, especially to the queens of season 3 that came back so soon after filming their season. That is charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent coded. Pink, Onyx, Paquita, Sagittaria, Poopy, Ornella, Jarigi, Samantha, and Drag Sethlas. Thank you so much. I cannot wait to see what your post-All-Stars careers will look like. And to Paquita and Jarigi, we'll see you on France versus the World. But as always, to my audience of viewers, please, please, please remember that I am just a gay person talking on the internet.